But if you only study mediocre, what you'll get is mediocre. If you only study what isn't working, if you only study what's negative, you will only know that.
There are things you can do with kids to advance their mental toughness. What we're coming down to is trying to strike this balance between overhelping and empowering our kids to solve things without our assistance.
Can we meet and speak to our child with respect and compassion, even though that means we're choosing to let them struggle for a bit?
We are back with what's now a special duo episode. We don't have a guest today.
We don't. Feels like we're throwing it back.
It feels like we just started, which was, over 100 episodes ago.
Yeah, crazy. On an idea born in, what was it, a restaurant over lunch?
A restaurant over lunch, right? Like just came out of our thoughts. And here we are with a full-blown podcast, and the caliber of our guests just keep increasing. We've had some great people on, and we continue to attract some great people.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
I wanted to get your thoughts about, I think you probably agree, and a lot of people think that grit, resilience, mental toughness is a valuable attribute that we should all have some aspect of, right? But do you know anyone that actually takes steps to increase their mental toughness?
I do know people because that's been an active, intentional choice of mine to include people in my circle who are continuously trying new things, who are looking to, even if it's something simple like, I've always wanted to learn how to paint, and they're taking a painting class, right? Just trying new things. I think it doesn't have to be about, I'm going to go run a marathon and really go through grueling experiences to build grit. No, it's people who are willing to just try new things.
That's actually my question right there, is that there are people that we know that want to try new things, learn how to paint, right? Run a marathon, lose weight, get stronger, write a book, things like that. But have you ever heard anyone in the last 5 or 10 years say to you, you know what, I'm working on my mental toughness. I don't think that I'm at the highest level of my mental toughness, or that my mental toughness can improve?
I've never heard someone say it in that way with those words.
Yeah, and that I found was pretty interesting, in that, here's something that we all think about, and we strive to teach to other people, especially our kids and stuff like that. But does anyone really know how to improve their mental toughness? And more so, does anyone ever stop and think to say, yeah, you know what? Let me assign a grade or a scale to my mental toughness. And I mean, I'll ask you live, out of a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, it doesn't matter what the scale is, what number would you assign to your mental toughness? And if you're picking a scale of 1 to 10, you can't choose 7.
I can't choose 7.
Can't
10
choose 7.
being, that means that 10 means like you are steel tough, right? Like you're plowing through things. I would say that I have cultivated a 6, and I am fully, actively actually working on cultivating 7, 8, 9, 10.
Good.
Like when you talk about like people's life perspectives skew what they feel is what is tough, right? Like if you ask my grandmother, who I shared with listeners, she's 100 and she's lived through air raids and, watched World War II ships sink with torpedoes and, the things she's lived through. I mean, I think I'm not nearly as tough as she is.
Yeah.
I think she's like a 20 out of 10. But it's also not fair to say, because I haven't had those experiences yet either.
You're zeroing in exactly on sort of my thoughts around this, is that, let's say you're at a 6 and your grandmother, great-grandmother or grandmother?
No, my grandmother.
Grandmother is at a 20 out of 10, right?
Yeah.
Did she get to 20 out of 10 through intentional, deliberate effort at moving herself from whatever number she was? Or was it just by pure chance that fate smiled on her and sent her adversities through which she grew? And, before you answer, you said you're a 6. What does an 8 look like for you? Like whatever you are at a 6, let's say, bam, magically you're now an 8. Describe how that's different than what your mental toughness is right now.
Yeah, I think, first of all, as an overachiever, we're continuously moving the goalpost, and we undergo what I like to call positive adaptation, right? In other words, we get used to our surroundings as being the norm. And so we forget, we lack perspective on what was before. We can tend to downplay the accomplishments we have had as a result. So I will say I assigned, and it's so serendipitous that you asked this question, and this is what we're talking about today, because I was literally thinking about it on my walk just last week. To directly answer your question, an 8. I feel like I would be able to recover even faster when I felt like my ego was talking. And what I mean by that is when I felt criticized, when I felt like the need to defend myself, or imposter phenomenon creeps in and that voice goes off that says, you don't know what you're doing. No one wants to hear from you. You know, I'm able to take that and put it down faster than I am now.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
At the same time, I assigned myself a 6 because on my walk, when I was thinking about this very question, I thought, ooh, I don't know if I'm strong enough. I don't know if I could, and I had to remind myself, no, girlfriend, you came from very meager beginnings and went through a lot of adversity to get to where you are, and overcoming something like postpartum depression. Everybody's path to healing is different, but my point for me is that I found a way through and then continue to thrive afterward.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's relative.
Yeah, all of this is relative, and the numbers that we're assigning don't really mean anything except to just give a goalpost. Okay, so now we know what a 6 looks like. We know what an 8 looks like. What specifically could you or someone do to move from a 6 to an 8 outside of just, hoping there are World War IIs or nuclear submarines or poverty or health issues in the family or grief or tragedy or things like that? Do you think that it's possible for us to wake up one day and say, you know what? I'm not thrilled with where I am mentally toughness wise. I'm not sure. I'm not thrilled with my grit or perseverance level. I'd like to improve it. I think the answer is yes, right?
Yeah. My thought though is how many of us are actually asking that question of ourselves?
Right. So that's where we started. And hopefully through this podcast, we're giving people the languaging and the thought that, hey, I don't care who you are on the planet, your mental toughness can improve. And you'll be better off with more mental toughness and more grit and perseverance. Are you doing anything about it? Are you just hoping that you're going to wake up one day with the strife and hardships of life that will bless you with the additional mental toughness? But let's ask that question. I want to go back to that question. Can we do something about it proactively, intentionally, without having to go through some adversity?
I believe that every time you self-reflect on your day, your interactions with people, the outcomes that you're experiencing, every time you slow down and look and think about, all right, how did I show up to that situation? Difficult ones, fun ones. There's always nuggets for us to learn especially when it's difficult. You've had a difficult conversation. You're like, what could I have thought about differently? What could I have gotten curious about instead of immediately falling to feeling like I need to defend myself? Just getting curious and asking those questions is a great way to rewire your brain to be less reactive and more responsive. Right. And that's a lot of what we do as coaches is we're getting people to just think about what they're experiencing and if there's a different way to look at it that might serve them better.
And I guess the logical next extension is, can you teach kids, or are there things you can do with kids to advance their mental toughness?
I'm curious to hear your answers to all of these too. I mean, what do you think?
I think that we don't spend enough time thinking about these types of intangibles. And I think that we should spend more time in advancing ourselves. To the question that I asked earlier and the answer you posed, I think doing hard things. I think consistently challenging yourself and showing yourself that you can do hard things and not bailing yourself out, right? So
absolutely.
not giving yourself a pass and
Yeah.
digging deep when the going gets tough, and
Hmm.
showing yourself that over time, the level of complexity and difficulty of things that you can do um, is huge to developing mental toughness. And
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, do you think that has anything to do with your socioeconomic status? That is, you know, someone has a lot of money. Let's pick, someone who grew up in poverty and
Hmm.
they've had to come out of poverty, put themselves through school, go to night school, become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, brick by brick, save up, build a house, and all of that stuff. Is the opportunity to develop mental toughness reserved for that person, or and is are Elon Musk's kids screwed because they have a lot of money? Do they have the opportunity to develop mental toughness equally as a person who has to go through that strife?
I would say yes, because it's not the money that makes you tough or not tough. Does it allow different experiences? Sure. But to what you were saying earlier, it is you can develop this with intention in mind, right? And a simple example of this for is really outside of money. I remember, especially in this day and age where technology makes communication so different than it is, or what it was when we were growing up. When my kid first started texting his friends, right? We're seeing what kind of conversations are happening. Somebody said something that was really inappropriate. And they're just kids. They
Yeah.
don't really quite grasp what it is that they're saying. And so I had the conversation with my son about, all right, what does this mean? Do you understand it? And what do you think about it? And now we can't really allow this behavior. So
Mhm.
now we have, and he's like, well, I can text him and tell him that wasn't cool. Like,
Mhm.
well, that is one option. But it's harder, but it's also you're less likely to miscommunicate if you just have that conversation live, face to face. Just have the conversation.
Mhm.
It's going to be really uncomfortable.
Mhm.
But you can't pop off a text and then wonder why it didn't quite have the outcome you wanted, because you've left it up to nuance now, right?
Mhm.
Depending on if the person read the text or not, or the tone of the text. And these kids nowadays, it's like how many emojis you use and what
Mhm.
emojis you use. It's too nuanced. And so I encouraged him to pick up the phone, and I observed them having the conversation. And at the end of it, that was really, really hard.
Mhm.
But I feel like I'm better friends with that person now
Mhm.
because I was able to draw my boundary and he respected it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's good. So just going back to, let's say, someone super wealthy and their kids, right? They
Hmm.
they have the opportunities to develop the same type of grit and perseverance and mental toughness, because I think a lot of people feel that, I didn't grow up with a lot of luxury or a lot of conveniences. My kids have all these
Hmm.
conveniences. Does that mean that when, something goes off the rails, they're not going to be able to handle difficulties and adversities when they come their way, right? And
Hmm.
you know, I totally recognize that a lot of us that are listening to this, and even the two of us that make this podcast, we come from a lot of privilege.
Yep.
We have a lot of assistance and help that some people might not. We have the luxury to work some days, not work some days, work from home, things like that. And there are people out there that don't have similar lifestyles and
Hmm.
similar conveniences and resources as we do. Totally understand that. But let's focus on just the narrow demographic that we believe is representative of our audience and few of us. Is it fair to say that because our kids have resources or luxuries even that we didn't have,
Hmm.
that those opportunities to develop the levels of mental toughness that we have are not possible for them? Like, a lot of times it comes up, you have someone that mows your lawn, Dinesh, right? When you were growing up, you mowed your lawn. Now
Hmm.
your son and your kid will never know how to do yard work,
Hmm.
and that robs them of the opportunity to develop the toughness of being out in the July heat
Hmm.
weed whacking.
Hmm.
So extrapolate that to any convenience or any resource that you guys might have or anyone might have now, whether you're
Yeah.
flying first class, you have cleaners in the house, you have Instacart, you have cell phones, you don't have to write a letter and wait 2 weeks for it to come back to
Yeah.
you, anything. Does that determine the opportunities for mental toughness?
I think it influences it, but it doesn't determine it. If you want to cultivate an experience of going out in the lawn and doing it, you can. There's nothing stopping you from doing that.
Yeah.
But it is a choice. And if you choose never to have your son mow the lawn,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that there won't be other opportunities for him to do that. And I know from, you and I are friends outside of the podcast, that is something that you do encourage your kids to do, right? You're trying new things, do things that are hard, expose yourself to the rainbow of opportunity that is out there. I'm reading The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker.
Yeah.
And although I think I subscribed to this thought, I wasn't conscious of it. Which was, he said, if you only study mediocre, what you'll get is mediocre, right? If you only study what isn't working, if you only study what's negative, you will only know that. Right. So the beauty comes in studying what is working and doing more of that and combining it with knowledge of what is not working so you can not do those things, right? Like, because if you're looking to cultivate extraordinary, if you're looking to cultivate, and I'm not talking about comparing one person to another. I'm talking about comparing you today, now, in this present moment. Are you, as a result of intention, better than the person you were yesterday? Right? Or even morning to night. That if you only focus on what works for the average, you will always stay within the average.
Absolutely. I think that's so true. I absolutely think that's so true. I also think resources and socioeconomic status and things like that have nothing to do with building a child's confidence, self-esteem, mental toughness, perseverance, or grit, right? I think wherever you are in all the spectrum of humanity, I think you have challenges. Whatever level you're at, you're going to have challenges. Some challenges that I've observed my kids having is boredom, right? Forgetting homework, forgetting their lunch, Jan forgets his water bottle, right? Forgetting his soccer cleats or shin guards, right? And I think that what a lot of us fall into, and I've been guilty of this, and I'd be interested to hear if you've been guilty of this, is that we trade our kids' self-esteem for our self-esteem.
Say more.
What I mean by that is that it feels good to rescue our kids. And to bail them out.
That's what good Indian parents do, right? Like, that's the paradigm we've been fed. Like, at least I was like, look at how much I've done for you.
Right. It feels good. It makes us feel really important and valued, helps our self-esteem to bail our kids out. And it's very difficult to let them sit with the struggle, right? And, I was recently listening to a podcast with Doc Amen, and there was a person he was talking about. I can't remember. A person he was talking about was sitting with their kid in second grade, helping the kid do homework. And, fast forward, I'll summarize. That person came to the realization that that parent had been through second grade already. The kid hadn't. So the parent didn't need to go through it again.
Right.
And if they set some decent boundaries, which I'm sure I'd like to see your reaction, was that, hey, you've got to do your homework. You've got to do it well. And if you don't, well, you'll have fun making new friends when you repeat second grade, and not assisting their kid in figuring out their challenges and obstacles, letting them sit with it and struggle with it. And I think that is totally separate or relevant than any other sort of socioeconomic status, education, things like that, because challenges exist at all levels. What do you think about that?
I agree 100%. I think that, and this is what I meant by it influences, but it doesn't determine. The types of challenges you face might be different. You're not looking to survive the way, our parents maybe were, or the way you and I grew up. It was a matter of, I got to figure this out.
Right.
Because otherwise, the alternative wasn't looking good. And I think that's still true depending on what you want to do with your money in terms of passing it on to the children. But regardless, that the struggles are different and there are opportunities, plenty, to let them figure it out.
Absolutely.
I can only imagine there's so many examples of times where we've let the kids struggle and fight through it. It's uncomfortable. It's icky. You question your decisions. Am I doing the right thing? Am I being a good mom? Am I being a good dad? There are times where we've caved. And then there's also times where we've let them struggle, but in the end, it was like, I didn't let them struggle for the right reason. Right. In other words, well, for example, when one of my kids was little, they were picky about texture. And we had family members tell us, like, you got to force them to eat. Like, if you don't want a picky eater, you got to force them to eat. And, over time, what we saw was that it was the way that we went about doing it that would determine whether or not the kid would accept the food. And so at one point, we didn't realize it was a texture thing. Like, he really just didn't like the texture. It wasn't the vegetable. It wasn't the seasoning. It wasn't any of that. It was just texture. And the amount of, forcing through that happened there, I look back and I'm like, that was really unnecessary. We could have just, we were too locked into the fear of, we're not raising a picky eater, to recognize, if I'd slowed down and really thought about it, he's not actually picky about food. He's just, there's this one pattern of texture. And he grew out of it. Like, he's not a picky eater anymore. So
well,
I think
isn't that what we're talking about is overhelping, where
yes, but recognizing that boundary and realizing it's not permanent, right? Like, in other words, so this was a texture thing. And we can still meet our kids where they're at. Hey, I know you don't like this texture. That doesn't mean I never feed it to them ever again. It means I'm not going to hold you responsible for something that you can't control. You don't like the texture. I have things that as an adult, I don't like. I don't like gutty. I really don't like it. But when people give it to me, I know how to make that choice depending on, whatever the situation is. I eat it or I don't eat it or whatever. But for a kid, that means continuously offering that again without making them feel wrong for having an aversion. Right.
No, that's what we're talking about exactly, is to use that example. If, a child doesn't like something, right? Having parents that restrict themselves from overhelp, right? And saying things like, okay, well, you don't like this. The rule isn't that you have to like and eat everything, right? If you don't eat vegetables, you're going to be constipated or not be healthy or whatever. So how would you like to consume your vegetables? And let them sit with it and say, well, maybe I can eat it another way. Maybe I can eat it as a pop, like a frozen vegetable juice pop or something like that. And I think that is exactly where I wanted to lead today's conversation, is overhelping robs them of the opportunity to develop competence and independence. And competence is the underpinning, just like for us, of self-esteem. When we figure things out, like going back to the vegetable and the texture, I assume it's a vegetable. A child that figures out how to navigate the mealtime with a texture they don't like is going to be able to figure out a mealtime or a situation where they're in college where there's only alcohol or cigarettes, and how to navigate that without feeling wrong or things like that. It's really building that resourcefulness.
So it's not I mean, you've heard me say this, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. It's the intention behind it. So you can force your way through a situation, or you can meet them where they're at and still hold your boundary. There's a balance, right? There's a balance of, in order to build a child's self-esteem, they also have to feel like you as the parent unconditionally love and accept them for who they are without judging them for it. Now, we're all going to have our own triggers. That's why I believe, kids are great teachers. That's our cue to learn how to lean into the impatience and figure out what's bothering us about that. So that we can be a better version of ourselves. But in that, in that over helping, it's more either you force the kid to eat it, but you're like, listen, buddy, I know you don't like it. I hear you. but we're going to try it. Even though it makes you not feel good, we're going to try it because I know this is safe for you. I know nothing bad will happen to you. Right. And you just continuously offer. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Right. We try to control so much that isn't really in our control.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, in the case of like learning, sometimes it's just a matter of like, is there too often, I think we go down the rabbit hole of fear-based thinking, like, oh my gosh, they're going to fail. But, that's not the worst thing. But just making sure too that you're saying, look, is there something else going on? Is there a learning disability? Is there a bullying issue? Is there, are you just mismatched with the teacher? There are other things that possibly could be going on. But I know for me as a parent that initially, before I did any of the personal development work, it was very easy for me to just succumb to like, my kid's just got to figure it out. And if he can't, that means I'm the failure as the mother.
But I think there are three options, basically. One, which you were saying, is force, right? And that's the how. Two is sort of meet them the way that where they are, right? And I think in some instances, some cases, not 100%, even that can be overhelping because you're being a crutch to help them solve this problem. But what about just saying, I wonder how you're going to solve that?
Yeah.
I remember recently we were going to a soccer game, and I had specifically said to Jayan, I'm going to go out, I'm going to go work out or whatever. When I come back home, be ready and have your water bottle. We were in the car, we're driving out. He's like, oh, I forgot my water bottle. And I said, well, I wonder how you're going to figure out how to get water. And I just let him sit with it and sit with it and sit with it. And I wasn't going to go back and get him a water bottle. I wasn't going to stop at a grocery store. I wasn't going to coach him to figure out how to get water. Right? Because I was just going to let him struggle with it.
Yeah, let him figure it out.
For as long as I thought was needed for building resilience. And ultimately, I think where we got to the game, and he looked at me, he's like, I don't have any water. I don't have an answer. What are we going to do about this? And, he's 9 years old, and I'm not going to just throw him to the deep end. I'm going to let him struggle a little bit. And so I said to him, I was like, well, who's your closest friend on the team? And he said, this boy. And I was like, okay, here, I have an empty water bottle. Go ask him to pour some in there. And I was trying to show him how he can be resourceful. But anyways, really what we're coming down to is trying to strike this balance between overhelping and empowering our kids to solve things without our assistance, right? I heard a really important quote about brushing teeth. And, we go through this, we have a younger child. Until you stop owning the responsibility of your kid's teeth, they're never going to own it. You have to just say, you didn't want to brush your teeth for 4 nights in a row? Great. But then you're going to have a cavity. And then they learn from that. And I think that is the way you create responsibility. That is the way you create self-esteem and perseverance and confidence, by showing them that they have the resources to be resourceful.
Right. But you hit on it without hitting on it, which was the way you went about the whole water bottle thing. There wasn't a lot of yelling. There wasn't a I told you so. There wasn't a what's wrong with you, as so many parents tend to say and do. I know, that used to be me. Honestly, some days it is still me because I'm imperfect. But when we can assist without judging these kids in the process, because they're learning too, that's the piece most people are missing, I feel, is you either overhelp because you don't think they can do it, or you think, oh, well, it's a reflection on me. Like, my kid shows up, we go to temple every Sunday, and some days I have thoughts, really not nice ones, about why is the kurta so wrinkled? Why is the hair, like, what's going on with these teenagers where they need like the hairstyles that are trending? Like, I don't get it. But that's not for me. Like, I have to stop myself and say, this isn't a reflection of me as a mother.
Yeah.
This is a reflection of what this kid is willing or not willing to do on a given day for whatever reason. He's tired. He didn't, whatever.
Right.
It's not on me.
Well, that's what I said earlier.
Yes,
oftentimes we're trading their self-esteem for our self-esteem. And if you
correct.
want to use that wrinkled clothes, it's, if you want, let's just unpack that. It's, let me feel good about myself by reminding them, judging them, yelling them, changing, or even doing it for them, ironing their clothes for them,
Yeah,
so that I look good, but we're robbing
right.
them of the opportunity
Absolutely.
of learning what is appropriate or not, right?
But importantly too, you either go through force or you let them struggle to where what their capacity is to be resourceful isn't fully developed yet either, right? It would be you could say, given the situation, it's not appropriate. Like we live in Texas, to send a 9-year-old kid out to play soccer with no water, like it's not safe, right? If I just said, I'm not going to give that to you, then, you should have figured it out. That's one thing. But finding that middle ground of like, I'm not going to make you feel badly.
Yeah.
What can you do here? And then if I see that you haven't come up with a solution, let me give you options. Which one of these do you want to do? Right? There's a whole balance there that takes art, it takes practice, it takes intention to cultivate that ability to communicate with effective compassion, basically.
Yeah. I would actually say that we're not talking about dangerous situations, right?
Mm-hmm.
No parent is endangering their child or anything like that. But I would actually say, if they're still struggling and unable to figure it out, there are some instances where you withhold the option still,
Yeah,
right? Um,
absolutely.
Boredom. Mom, I don't know what to do. Mom, I don't know
Okay.
what to do. Mom, I don't know what to do. Well, you could read a book. You could do some math. Why don't you go outside and play with the ball, right? Why don't you clean up your room? Why don't you pick up your shoes? Why don't you pack your backpack? That, in my opinion, sometimes can be bordering on overhelping,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to saying, well, I'm really looking forward to see how you're going to solve that boredom,
Yeah.
and send them back out with the problem, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that helps people develop esteem, competence, and ability to self-soothe.
Mm-hmm.
Because as adults, we use substances, we use distraction, we use dopamine, we use social media when we can't self-soothe as a way to calm our anxiety, calm our stress, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I recently read about Harvard study, I believe, over 400 but less than 500 kids, 460, 470 kids of inner city kids they
Mm-hmm.
tracked for 70 years.
Wow.
The only one-to-one correlation or factor that was tied to self-esteem, whether or not they worked as a child for money.
Interesting.
And I actually, I read that and I was like, this is so true, because it teaches the child value for effort.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to say, hey, I did all of that and I'm tired and all I got was $5.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have an ability to correlate what how they use their time, what they do with it. Time is a resource that you can exchange for things, right? And now the brain goes to work and say, well, wait, how can I make more? Right? How
Mm-hmm.
can I leverage and things like that? And I like this study a lot, because when I was 14 or 14, yeah, 14 or 15, I had to go to work at Taco Bell. I was making 4.75 an hour, and um, I remember not working at Burger King. You want to know why I worked at Taco Bell instead of Burger King?
They probably paid more.
25 cents more per hour.
Adds up. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it just made a difference at 14
Yeah.
years old. I was like, no, that's for my 1 hour, I get a quarter more, and
Right.
I get a free meal, and I like Taco Bell, and I got unlimited soda. I
Yeah.
was like,
Sound
this is
good.
a
14-year-old's
better
year old's
deal.
dream.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is just better
Yeah.
deal. But I think it supports what we talked about today, is that ability to reason with yourself and say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, there's a consequence, there's a benefit, there's an opportunity cost, all without knowing that that's what happens when you have a job. Pretty neat, huh?
Yeah. It is neat. It's especially interesting for me because I came from the background of my parents would say, don't work.
Yeah,
You don't need to work. All you need to do is get really, really good grades.
yeah,
In fact, I remember, I never really wanted to help out around the house, but when I did offer, more often than not, I would get no, 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 no. All you have to do is study.
Yeah.
And that, does take when you assign my worth is going to be assigned to a number
Hmm.
that isn't always objective, right? Not every grade is an objective representation of what you know.
Yeah.
That's not a healthy place to be, but
Right.
many South Asian kids have experienced this. I never worked, but I think too, it is something that I'm going to encourage my kids to do because they don't have the same background that I
Mhm.
did. This meager immigrant mentality that my parents had, and they were starting to find success to where I didn't need to go out to work to help make
Yeah.
ends meet. Um, it's a different experience, and I think that having a job teaches you things that otherwise you don't learn.
Well, you should check out. I think you can everyone you can Google this and find it. I think it's a Harvard study about self-esteem and working as a child, and we'll drop it in the show notes or we'll post it
Yeah.
on the Instagram. But yeah, no, this has been a really fascinating conversation. I think we'll continue it. Um,
Hmm.
and like we said, opportunities for perseverance, self-esteem, grit are not solely reserved for people with lower socioeconomic status
Hmm.
or difficulties in growing up or challenges such as one parent's not in the house, one parent's in the house, lack of education, things like that. I think challenges and obstacles will come to all of us,
Hmm.
and as parents we have to be deliberate and intentional on how much we use our inner needs and our desires to make life for our kids easy and solve and overhelp. And I think we all can benefit from holding back some of that. And again, like I said,
Absolutely.
caveat, asterisk, we're not talking about anything dangerous. We're not talking about sending kids to bed hungry or things like that. We're just talking about when within that narrow boundary where a child makes a decision and the consequence, though unpleasant, is not painful,
Right.
can we intentionally withhold our helping to allow them to experience the negative consequences of
Yeah.
some choices and take ownership of their
Yeah.
choices?
Yeah. I say that's great. And as long as we keep the long-term goal in mind, as you said, intentionally, instead of it's busy day to day. People are rushing around to different activities. And so we think to ourselves, it's just easier if I help them with the homework so we can move on to the other thing,
Yeah.
right? We lose sight of the long-term perspective. And so if we can just keep that in mind, along with, can we meet and speak to our child with respect and compassion, even though that means we're choosing to let them struggle for a bit?
Yeah.
I think those are really, really great ways to start to implement some of what we're talking about today,
Yeah.
so that we do build a generation that's a little bit more gritty, if you will.
Absolutely. And, we're talking about kids. We spent a lot of time talking about parenting kids. Listeners, this isn't about kids, it's about
Hmm.
us as well. And if we are looking for the easy way, we're looking for the fast way, we're reaching for the calculator on our phone instead of doing the math ourselves. For the kids, we don't even develop that skill or that resourcefulness. But for us, what's happening is that we'll atrophy that skill,
Yeah.
right? If you're not making yourself move, if you're not consistently challenging yourself, we're going to forget how to do hard things. And so, listeners, as you go through your day, we want you to think about some of the questions we asked. Where would you rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? You can't use 7 on mental toughness. Whatever number you choose is the right number. And just think about what that looks like. And then what would it be like to be at the next number or two numbers
Hmm.
up? And what might that look like? And how are we going to get there?